Okay, based on all the DMs I've gotten, it seems like there's a lot of confusion about how taxes work when you get paid money from YouTube AdSense or TikTok ad revenue or pretty much anything like that from a social media platform that pays you. I get DMs from Discord all the time now of people saying like, well, do I have to pay tax on this? What percentage of this is taxed? How do I see how much tax I have to pay on this? And there's a lot of confusion surrounding this, and I've actually had to work this out myself. Now, in case you guys don't know me, my name is Bennett, and I'm primarily known for the YouTube automation channels that I ran. Here's one that made 11,000 over its lifetime, and here's another one that's made 5,000 over its lifetime. And there's obviously a lot of other revenue related to this as well, like music royalties was around 40K. But funny enough, that's not all. I also own a lot of my own channels like Fly Juggler, where I post a bunch of videos of me literally juggling. And then there's a lot of other channels related to making money online, like this one you see here. And all of these are bringing in ad revenue. Not to mention, I also make money from social media, from Snapchat, TikTok, and even Instagram at some points. So I'm not some sort of expert. I'm not a financial advisor, but I have had to pay tax based on money I've earned from YouTube. So I've picked up on a few things. And in this video, I'm at least going to give you the top-down overview of how you actually have to pay taxes on this and how this works. And for any more specific research on that, you might have to just consult ChatGPT. So let's get into it. Okay, so what you first need to understand is in the US and honestly in most countries, taxes work completely differently for someone who's employed versus someone who is self-employed or works for themselves. And in case you're wondering, if you make money from social media, that revenue is in the category of self-employed. So the money that you make from social media is going to be taxed in a completely different way than the money you would make as an employee would be taxed. Now, with an employee, it's much simpler because essentially the way that works is your taxes are withheld. So all that means is, let's say you were going to make 100K in a year, but you actually had to pay 20% taxes. That 20%, which equals 20K, is actually just going to be withheld from your salary. So instead of being paid 100K and then you having to pay tax on 20% of it and giving 20K to the government, instead your 20K in taxes that you owe to the government will actually be withheld by your employer and you'll just be paid the 80K. So in that case, you don't really have to worry about paying the taxes yourself. But if you're self-employed, or in other words, if you're making money from kind of your own endeavors and you're not specifically employed to a company, this is how YouTube AdSense works, this is how TikTok works, this is how Snapchat works. They do not withhold the taxes. You have to actually report the income that you made, that 100K, and then if you owe 20%, you have to take it out of the money that you were given by TikTok or YouTube and then pay that to the government. So in case you're like, well, Bennett, how does that actually work? Here's my AdSense. Now this is where YouTube pays you out for the taxes that you have to pay. You can see my payment was $9,000. Not to flex. And if I go to my payment information on my AdSense, you can see that I actually had to submit my tax info in order to be paid out. And if you are getting paid by YouTube, you also would have needed to submit your tax information in order to be paid out, because this is how the government actually keeps track of how much money you were supposed to be paid. So with YouTube, in my specific case, I actually got a W-9 form, but in the majority of cases, if you're just an individual, this is true on YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, you'll be given a 1099 form. Now, a 1099 form is essentially a report that company gives to the government that says, we paid this individual with this social security number this much money. So if you're thinking, oh, well, when I need to report my taxes at the end of the year, why don't I just lie about how much income I made and then I don't have to pay as much taxes? The reason that if you try to do this, you won't even get away with it is because these companies are issuing 1099s to you and the government. So the government gets a 1099 form that says TikTok paid MoneyMind or Bennett with my social security number this much money by the end of the year. So the government knows, according to that 1099, how much money I made from that company. Now, if I try to fudge my income and make it lower than it is, they'll know because the 1099 from TikTok says that my income should be this much, when in reality, I only reported this much in my total income. So do not lie about the amount of income that you're making, because if you do, you'll owe way more money as fines because the government will find that you didn't pay your taxes. And there's a big penalty for not paying the amount of taxes and not accurately reporting the amount of money that you owe, including in really bad cases, jail. Now, obviously that's extreme, and that really only happens if they find that you're intentionally misrepresenting your income, but still it's better to be on the safe side. Now, obviously there are a lot of things you can do to reduce your tax burden that are legitimate, and that's a whole nother video, but this is basically the core of how taxes work. So the way that it works, if you're earning money from your own side hustles and you're not employed by anyone, is you have to track how much income you made and how many expenses you had, and then you have to report all of that, and you actually only pay tax on the profit. So I know what you're thinking now. Well, Bennett, how on earth am I going to track all of the income that I made and all of the expenses that I had and which are legitimate business expenses? And this is so complicated. How am I going to do this? First of all, it is complicated. This is why accounting is a ginormous field and why it's a skill I recommend people actually learn and get good at. Now, with that being said, I am going to show you guys like the hack that I use to make tracking a lot easier, but understand that like this is not an easy thing to do. Keeping track of all of your income and all of your expenses is actually overall quite complicated, which is why taxes is actually kind of hard if you're self-employed and if you're not just an employee who earns a standard salary where your taxes would be withheld. So the solution that I use for this is something called QuickBooks. Now, QuickBooks basically lets you connect all of your different financial accounts and shows you all of the transactions that are happening on it so you can track all of your income. So you can see here I have my different bank accounts connected. I also have my PayPal's connected. And so this way I can track all of the income that's coming in and out of all of the different sources. And so I can track which ones are legitimate income and which ones are legitimate expenses, and then categorize all of that, and it makes it way easier to do your taxes. Now, what if you're like, oh, well, Bennett, sometimes when I get paid, it's income, and then sometimes when I get paid, it's not actually income, it's just a gift or money that I use for something else, and I don't want to track it in my actual income, it's just a transfer between accounts. Well, what QuickBooks lets you do is it lets you track each transaction and then decide whether you want to exclude or include that in like the total that you have at the end of the year. So as you can see in this bank account right here, I actually have a lot more that I have to type in. But like, for example, there's a lot of legitimate expenses here, like LinkedIn. This is a subscription to a software that I pay for, and I know I actually pay for this. So since it's a software, I'm just gonna categorize it as that, and I can click post. And now that transaction has been categorized, and when I go to it at the end of the year, it's going to be considered an expense at the end of the year, and I'll be able to accurately calculate my income and my expenses because I'll have categorized all of the transactions that I had. And so by the end of the year, since I was doing this throughout the year, it's very easy to track and much, much, much easier to do taxes. I'll leave the link to QuickBooks in the description. This is genuinely what I use to track everything. But yeah, if you're not using a tool like this and you have a lot of transactions, especially if it's spread between a lot of different like bank account, PayPal, Venmo, whatever, it's going to be a lot harder to track this stuff than if you have a tool that actually helps you do it, which is why I use QuickBooks. But yeah, with that being said, that pretty much covers it for how you actually pay taxes on YouTube income. Obviously, if you're in the US, when you actually have to pay taxes, you can go to irs.gov, and this is where you can actually calculate how much taxes you owe, file your taxes, and pay them. And if you're in a different country, it might be different for you, so I don't know the answer to the specifics on whatever country you live in, but at least I can say this is how it works in the United States. Now, I hope this helped, and I hope this also laid the basis for why people talk about like, oh, I'm gonna, get a tax write-off and count this as a business expense. The reason people do this is because you only pay taxes on how much profit your business makes. So if you have an expense that's low-key a personal expense, like let's say I wanted to buy this water bottle anyways, but you could reasonably say, oh, well, I needed this water bottle for my business so I could stay hydrated and continue to make more money. The tax code allows you to write off business expenses or deduct them from your income as long as they are ordinary, reasonable, and necessary for pursuing more revenue. I'm pretty sure that's actually the wording that the tax code uses to count business expenses, which again, this is why you always hear people trying to count personal things as business expenses, because it means that even if it was something you are going to buy anyway, if it's now a business expense, you profited less and therefore you have less taxable income and therefore you owe less money to the government. Now, I think there is a lot of confusion around this though. Like if you write something off, that does not make it free. That is like a huge idiotic misconception. The best way to think about it is that if you write something off, you're essentially getting a discount of whatever your tax rate would be. So if my effective tax rate at the end of the year was 20%, if I was able to write this off, that means instead of this expense being the full cost, it essentially is 20% cheaper than what it would have been, because now I don't owe 20% tax on whatever the cost of this would have been. So overall, even though it is more complicated keeping track of everything and actually paying taxes as someone who's self-employed or like an entrepreneur, there are actually a lot of benefits that come through it when you are not paid as an employee. That's called W-2 income. If your income isn't coming from W-2, you can use strategies like this to reduce your taxable income. Now, to be clear, there are also big advantages advantages of having W-2 income. For example, and again, this is just at least in the United States, if you're self-employed, you have to pay 15% of that revenue to what's called FICA taxes, which is basically Medicaid and Social Security. But if you're employed, your employer actually has to pay half of that. So then you actually only have to pay like 7.5% tax on that instead of like 15%. So there are advantages and disadvantages to both taxes on being employed and taxes on being self-employed. But if you want to take the entrepreneurial path, you're going to be self-employed or a corporation at the beginning. And so this is the tax code and the ultimate game that you're playing. And I hope this video covered the basics and at least the underlying knowledge of what you need of how taxes work in that context. Towards tax season next year, I might actually do a full video breaking down like all of the different things that you can get deductions on and all of the most beneficial ways that you can set up your LLC or your corporation to avoid as many taxes as possible. But that's a whole separate video that if you don't even understand the basics won't be helpful. So I hope this video helped you. My mission with this channel is to remove gatekeeping from money-making methods so I don't have to gatekeep on how these taxes work. That's how it works. And to increase transparency in the Make Money Online space, and I like to lead by example. So at the beginning of this video, I showed you guys my revenue, I showed you guys my AdSense. And so I believe the Make Money Online space is sorely lacking good role models right now. And the way that I'd like to improve the space is by increasing trust through actual transparency. If you're gonna be giving people advice on how to make money, you have a responsibility to actually show people how much money you made and not like gatekeep that. So if you support that mission, consider subscribing and leaving a like on this video. But the best way to support it is to join my free Discord in the description, which now has 17,300 members. You guys are absolutely crazy. Literally join this Discord and drop your best money-making sauce. That's actually the best way to support me. And you can see my Discord is actually active right now. There's people in here streaming, talking about YouTube. So we actually have an awesome active community. So I highly recommend you join. And lastly, before I go, I have an online free course platform that is dropping soon, and the waitlist for that will be in the description. It'll be dropping very soon, but I have more announcements coming, and I'm really, really excited for that. So look out for that as well, and thank you guys all so much for watching. I'll catch you on the next video, and peace.